I pulled into the driveway of our house, the same routine I had followed for over a decade. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lawn, making everything seem calm and peaceful, just like my life had always seemed. As I turned off the engine, I took a moment to reflect, as I often did these days. I had everything a man could ask for: a solid career, a nice home, and, most importantly, the perfect wife. Jessica. Even after all these years, I couldn't believe my luck. She was everything I ever wanted: funny, smart, and beautiful. Her laugh could light up a room, and the way she smiled at me always made the day's stress disappear. She had her little quirks too, like always forgetting where she left her phone or getting sidetracked in the middle of a conversation, but I loved every part of her. I used to tell her she was my world, and I meant it. We'd met when I was just starting my job as a high school history teacher. She was working as a receptionist at a law firm down the street. It wasn't some whirlwind romance, but it was real and steady. This was the kind of love that grew stronger with time, built on trust and years of shared experiences. Together, we built a life that felt solid, unbreakable, even. Grabbing my bag from the passenger seat, I smiled, thinking about tonight. Nothing special, just a quiet dinner at home, but I loved those evenings. There was something comforting about the routine we had built. We didn't need grand adventures to feel close. The ordinary had always been enough for us. As I walked up the steps, I felt the same sense of contentment I had for years. Everything was in its place. Sure, we'd had rough patches, every couple does, but we always made it through. I pushed open the front door, expecting to hear Jessica in the kitchen or see her relaxing in the living room. "Jess, I'm home," I called out. Silence. I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door and loosened my tie. It wasn't unusual for her to be out running errands or catching up with friends, but she'd been gone more often than usual lately. Still, I brushed the thought away. There was no reason to worry. She was probably out with her sister or stuck in traffic. Heading into the kitchen, I grabbed a cold beer from the fridge and leaned back against the counter. Everything felt normal, but there was a slight, nagging feeling I couldn't shake. It was probably nothing. After all, this was my life, my perfect life. The first signs were so small, I barely noticed them. Jessica had always been on her phone, nothing unusual about that. But lately, something felt different. I'd catch her typing away, smiling at her screen, and when I'd ask, "What's so funny?" she'd just say, "Oh, nothing. Just Katie." And that was that. I didn't think much of it at first. I trusted her, of course. We'd been through so much together that I didn't have any reason not to. Still, something about the way she held her phone close, the way she seemed to tilt it away from me when I walked by, left me feeling off. Then there were the late nights. Jessica had always been a social person. She'd go out with her sister Katie or meet up with friends after work from time to time. That had never bothered me. I liked that she had her own life. But recently, it was happening more often. Too often. "Work's been crazy," she'd say, texting me to let me know she'd be late. Or she'd tell me she was grabbing dinner with Katie. But it wasn't just that she was out more, it was the way she acted when she got home. A little too cheerful. A little too distracted. One night, she came home after midnight. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I heard her keys in the door. The clock on my nightstand read 12:27 a.m. My stomach tightened, but I brushed it off. She was probably just catching up with her sister. No big deal. I rolled over and heard her quiet footsteps in the hall, trying not to wake me. She slipped into the bedroom, and I opened my eyes just enough to see her in the dim light. She smelled different, not like her usual perfume. It was something sharper, unfamiliar, like men's cologne. "Hey," I mumbled, my voice heavy with sleep. "Everything okay?" Jessica froze, then smiled at me, The kind of smile she used to give when she'd forget an anniversary or a birthday. Yeah, everything's fine. Katie and I just lost track of time. I nodded, but something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. She wasn't being herself. She kicked off her shoes and quickly climbed into bed, turning her back to me. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the scent of that cologne lingering in the air. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe she'd hugged a friend or walked past someone wearing too much aftershave. I wanted to believe that, so I told myself I was overreacting. But as the days went on, the feeling in my gut only grew stronger. Jessica started leaving the house earlier, saying she needed to run some errands or meet a friend for coffee. That was normal enough. But when I asked her where she was going, her answers were vague. She seemed distracted when we talked, always glancing at her phone like she was waiting for something, or someone. It wasn't just the time apart that bothered me. It was the distance, even when we were together. The little things, like how she'd pull her phone close when I walked into the room. How she'd lock the screen quickly, like she didn't want me to see. I wanted to believe it was nothing, that I was just imagining it. But it was hard to shake the feeling that something had changed. Then came the moment that turned suspicion into fear. One Sunday afternoon, while Jessica was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the counter. I was in the kitchen, putting away groceries, when I heard the soft vibration. At first, I ignored it. But it kept buzzing. My curiosity got the better of me. I walked over to the counter and glanced at the screen. The message preview was short, but it was enough to send a chill through my veins. "Miss you already, winky face." The name on the screen wasn't Katie's. It was Nick. I stood there for a moment, staring at the phone, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was overthinking it. But the truth was staring me in the face, and no matter how hard I tried to push it down, I couldn't escape the feeling that my world was starting to unravel. That message from Nick stayed with me for days, gnawing at the back of my mind like an itch I couldn't scratch. I told myself it didn't mean anything. Friends text each other, right? But deep down, I knew that wasn't the whole truth. Something felt wrong. And once that doubt crept in, it was impossible to shake. A week later, I found myself doing something I never thought I'd do, snooping. Jessica had gone out for drinks with the girls, but after that text from Nick, I wasn't so sure who she was really meeting. She left her laptop on the kitchen table, her phone charging next to it. I stared at the screen for what felt like forever. This was the last thing I wanted to do, invade her privacy like this, but I needed answers. Slowly, almost against my better judgment, I opened the laptop and clicked on her messages. At first, it was nothing, chats with Katie, her co-workers, random group texts. Then I saw his name, Nick. I clicked, and there it was. Flirting. Inside jokes. Plans to meet up. And then, the one that made my heart stop, "I can't wait to see you tonight, babe. Last weekend was incredible, winky face." My breath caught in my throat as I read those words over and over, each one landing like a punch to the gut. Last weekend. While I was at home, thinking she was with her sister, she had been with him. Suddenly, every vague excuse, every late night, every awkward silence made sense. This wasn't just some harmless flirtation, it was an affair. I closed the laptop, trying to keep myself together, but everything was spinning. The house felt different now, empty, like the walls were closing in on me. I had no idea what to do next. How do you confront someone you've loved for so long, knowing they've been lying to your face? A couple of hours later, I heard the front door open. Jessica was home. I didn't get up to greet her like I usually did. Instead, I sat there on the couch, my mind racing as I listened to her walk in, humming softly, like nothing had changed. "Hey, babe," she said as she came into the living room, her smile bright, eyes sparkling. She kicked off her shoes and walked toward me, but I couldn't return the smile. "You okay?" I stared at her for a moment, the words on the tip of my tongue, my chest tight with the weight of everything I knew. I wanted to shout, to demand an explanation. But all I could manage was, "How was your night?" She hesitated for a split second, just long enough for me to see it. "It was fine," she said, shrugging. "You know, the usual. Just catching up with the girls." I nodded, my jaw clenched, trying to keep my voice steady. "Are you sure that's where you were?" Her smile faltered. "What's that supposed to mean?" I looked up at her, the truth boiling inside me. "I saw your messages. From Nick." Her face went pale, and she stood there, frozen. For a moment, she didn't say anything, didn't move, didn't breathe. Then, she started to speak, her voice shaky. "It's not what you think." "Not what I think?" I stood up, my heart pounding in my ears. "You've been sneaking around behind my back for how long now? How long have you been lying to me?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. I couldn't care. Not now. "It was just a mistake," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean for it to happen." I laughed bitterly. "A mistake? Jessica, this isn't one bad decision. This is months of you betraying me, lying to my face." She reached out, but I stepped back, the distance between us now more than just physical. "Please," she begged, "I can explain." But I didn't want to hear it. Whatever excuse she had, whatever apology was on her lips, none of it would fix what she had done. I turned and walked toward the door, my mind racing. "I don't want to hear it," I said over my shoulder, barely able to get the words out. "I'm done." And with that, I left the house that had once felt like home, but now felt like the scene of a crime I hadn't seen coming. I spent the night at a hotel, lying on the stiff mattress with my mind running in circles. I thought I'd feel some kind of relief after confronting her, after letting the truth come out. But instead, I felt hollow, like someone had scooped out everything inside me and left nothing but a shell. By morning, I was exhausted, physically and emotionally. I knew I couldn't stay in limbo forever. So, I made a decision. I was going back to the house to face her. To get answers. When I pulled into the driveway, her car was still there. The knot in my chest tightened. This wasn't going to be easy. I stepped inside, and there she was, sitting on the couch, her face pale and puffy from crying. She looked up at me as I walked in, her eyes pleading. "Tom," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I'm so sorry. Please, just let me explain." I closed the door behind me, keeping my back to her for a second longer than necessary. I needed to gather myself, hold it together. Then I turned to face her. "Start talking." She swallowed hard, her hands shaking as she wrung them in her lap. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. Nick, he's just a friend." It got out of hand, I swear. "A friend?" I echoed, my voice sharp. "Friends don't send each other messages like last weekend was incredible, Jess." She flinched at that, and for a moment, I almost felt guilty. Almost. "It was a mistake," she said, her voice trembling. I didn't plan for it to happen. It just did." "You didn't plan for it?" I spat, my anger finally breaking through. "You've been seeing him for months, Jessica. That doesn't just happen." She broke down then, tears spilling over as she covered her face with her hands. "I know," she sobbed. "I know I messed up. I don't even know why I did it. I was lost, Tom. I felt disconnected from everything. From us." Her words hit me hard, knocking the air out of my lungs. "Disconnected? From us? So, what?" I asked, my voice low, shaking. You felt disconnected, and instead of talking to me, you ran to him? How does that fix anything? She looked up at me, her face wet with tears, eyes full of regret. I don't know. I just wanted to feel something again, to feel alive. The words twisted like a knife in my chest. Alive? I whispered, incredulous. I thought we were building a life together. I thought we were happy. How could you throw all of that away? She sobbed harder, her shoulders shaking. I didn't mean to. I wasn't thinking. I stared at her, the person I had loved for so long, now a stranger. The Jessica I knew would never do something like this. The Jessica I trusted, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, she was gone. There was a long silence between us, filled only by her sobs and the sound of my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Finally, I spoke. I gave you everything, Jess. All of me. And you just threw it all away, for what? Some fling? Some guy you don't even care about? She shook her head, her voice breaking. It wasn't about him, Tom. It was never about him. It was me. I don't know what's wrong with me. I wanted to feel sympathy for her, to forgive her the way I always had whenever we fought. But this was different. There was no going back from this. She had broken something between us that couldn't be fixed. I don't know if I can do this anymore, I said quietly, more to myself than to her. Her eyes widened, fear flashing across her face. No, Tom, please. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, we can. I'll do anything. Just don't leave. I sighed, exhausted. It's not that easy. You broke my trust, Jess. How am I supposed to believe anything you say now? She stood up then, coming toward me, her hands outstretched. Please, Tom. Don't walk away. I love you. I never stopped loving you. I stepped back, holding up my hand to stop her from coming any closer. Love? I said, bitterly. You don't cheat on someone you love. Her tears fell harder now, but I was done. I couldn't stand to look at her any longer. I need time, I said, my voice cold. I need space to figure out what I want. I don't know if we can fix this. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out the door, leaving her standing there in the home we had built together, a home that no longer felt like mine. The days that followed felt like I was moving through quicksand. Everything seemed slower, heavier, as if time had decided to drag out my misery. I hadn't gone back to the house since I walked out on Jessica. Instead, I crashed on my buddy Mike's couch. He didn't ask too many questions, he could tell something was seriously wrong just from the way I looked when I showed up at his door. I wasn't ready to talk about it with anyone. I wasn't sure I could. How do you explain that your entire world just collapsed without sounding like a fool? Every time I tried to make sense of it, the same thoughts kept looping back in my head. How long had she been lying to me? Was any of it real? The dinners, the vacations, the years we spent building a life, was it all fake? I hadn't told anyone about the affair yet, not even my parents. I wasn't ready to hear their questions, or worse, their pity. All I knew was that I couldn't go back to Jessica, not now. On the third day, I called a lawyer. I didn't know if I was ready for divorce, but I needed to understand my options. I had worked too hard to build our life, and I wasn't about to let her tear it apart. As much as it hurt, I had to think logically. She had betrayed me, and trust like that doesn't get rebuilt overnight, if ever. Tom, you're making the right choice, Mike said one evening as we shared a couple of beers on his back porch. She didn't respect you or your marriage. You can't just let her off the hook. I know, I muttered, staring into the foam at the top of my beer. But it's not that easy, man. 15 years, How do you just walk away from all of that? He sighed and leaned back in his chair. You don't walk away from the memories, but you have to walk away from the person who made them meaningless. Otherwise, you'll never heal. It was good advice, but it was easier said than done. I couldn't just flip a switch and stop caring about Jessica, no matter how much she had hurt me. Every time I pictured her with Nick, laughing, touching him, kissing him, it felt like I was being torn apart all over again. A few days later, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number at first, but as soon as I answered, her voice hit me like a wave. Tom, it's me, Jessica said, her voice shaking. Please, can we talk? I paused, gripping the phone tighter. I don't think there's anything left to say. There is, she insisted. I know I screwed up. I know you don't trust me, but please, let me explain everything. I'll do anything to fix this. Just give me a chance. I closed my eyes, leaning back against the couch. Part of me wanted to hear her out, to let her explain. Maybe there was some part of this I didn't know, something that could make it all make sense. But I knew deep down that no explanation could take away the betrayal. I don't know if that's going to help, I said quietly. I don't know if I can even look at you right now. There was silence on the other end of the line, then a small, broken voice. I understand. But please? I need to know if you're coming back home. I don't know, I admitted. I haven't decided yet. Tom? I'll do anything, she pleaded. Counseling, therapy, whatever it takes. I don't want to lose you. I sat there for a long time, thinking about what she was saying. The woman I loved had shattered our life, but now she was begging me to help her put the pieces back together. Could I really do that? Could I even try? I'll think about it, I finally said, my voice low. We hung up, and I sat there in the quiet, staring out at the darkening sky. Mike was right, walking away from someone you've spent so much of your life with wasn't easy. But neither was staying. The next morning, I drove back to the house. It felt like I was returning to the scene of a crime. The minute I stepped through the door, I could feel the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on me. Jessica was sitting on the couch, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her, her eyes red and swollen. She stood up as soon as she saw me. Tom, thank you for coming back, she said, her voice cracking. I know you don't have to. I stayed near the door, keeping the distance between us. I came back to talk, Jess. But I don't know what's going to happen after this. She nodded, wiping her face. I know. I'm just glad you're here. For the next hour, we sat in the living room, and Jessica told me everything. She talked about how disconnected she had felt for months, how she didn't know how to fix it. How she had turned to Nick for attention, for excitement, but it had spiraled out of control. She cried as she begged for my forgiveness, swearing it had only been physical and that she still loved me. But as much as she tried to explain it, the truth was glaring, as she had made a choice, over and over again, to betray me. And no amount of therapy or apologies could erase that. I don't know if I can forgive this, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Jessica broke down again, sobbing into her hands. Please, Tom. I'm begging you. I'll do anything. I'll prove to you that I can change. I stood up, looking down at her, feeling the weight of the decision in front of me. I had two choices, try to rebuild something broken or walk away from the wreckage. And I still wasn't sure which path I would take. The days after our conversation passed in a blur. Jessica stayed at the house while I continued crashing at Mike's place. I needed space, and she understood, or at least, she didn't push. Each time I thought about going home, my mind filled with images of her and Nick. I couldn't stop it, and I wasn't sure if I ever would. She texted me every day, always the same, I love you, I miss you, please come home. Each message felt like a weight, dragging me further into a place I didn't know how to navigate. Part of me wanted to believe her, to believe she was truly sorry and willing to fix things. But the other part, the part that had seen the messages, heard the lies, was harder to convince. After a week of silence, I finally agreed to go to counseling with her. Not because I was sure it would help, but because I owed it to myself to explore every option before I made any final decisions. The first session was awkward. We sat in a brightly lit office across from a middle-aged therapist named Dr. Phillips, who had kind eyes and a calm voice. Jessica was nervous, fidgeting with her hands, while I stayed quiet, waiting for someone else to speak first. So, Dr. Phillips began, looking between the two of us. "Why don't you tell me what brings you here today?" Jessica took a deep breath and glanced at me before speaking. I messed up," she said, her voice trembling. "I betrayed Tom's trust, and now I'm afraid I've lost him. I'll do whatever it takes to fix it." Dr. Phillips nodded, then turned to me. "Tom, how are you feeling about all of this?" I stared down at my hands, trying to find the right words. "I'm angry," I said finally. "And hurt. She says she wants to fix things, but I don't know if that's even possible." "How do you rebuild trust after something like this?" "That's a very valid question," Dr. Phillips said. "Trust, once broken, is difficult to regain. But it's not impossible. The real question is whether you both are willing to put in the time and effort to rebuild that foundation." Jessica nodded eagerly, her eyes red from the tears she was holding back. I'm willing to do whatever it takes, Tom. I swear." But I didn't nod. I wasn't sure what I wanted. I wasn't even sure if I could forgive her. How could I? The person I trusted most in the world had shattered everything I thought I knew about us. The sessions continued. Week after week, Jessica poured her heart out, admitting her mistakes, saying all the right things. I listened, I nodded, but I was never fully there. Half of me wanted to believe her, to believe that people could change, that love could survive even the worst betrayals. The other half of me wondered if I was just fooling myself. We spent hours dissecting our relationship. How we had grown apart over time. How I had thrown myself into work, how she had felt ignored. But even as she explained her reasons, I kept coming back to one question: why didn't she talk to me? Why didn't she come to me instead of running into someone else's arms? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that wasn't something I could ever get past. No matter how many apologies she offered, no matter how much she said she loved me, she had made a choice. And it wasn't me. One night, after another long and emotionally draining session, Jessica and I sat in the car outside the therapist's office. The air between us felt heavy, thick with everything left unsaid. "Tom," she said softly, turning to me. "Do you think we can get through this?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stared out the windshield, watching the streetlights flicker in the distance. "I don't know," I finally admitted. "I want to. But I don't know if I can." She reached out to take my hand, her touch tentative. "I love you. I know I hurt you, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right. I'll never do anything like this again. I just want a second chance." I pulled my hand away, feeling the familiar knot tightening in my chest. "It's not just about not doing it again, Jess. It's about the fact that you did it at all." Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But the weight of her betrayal was still too heavy for me to feel anything else. "I know," she whispered. "I know. But please, don't give up on us." We sat there in silence, the words hanging between us like a question neither of us knew how to answer. I wanted to say yes, to tell her that we could work through it, that our love was stronger than this. But I couldn't. The truth was, I wasn't sure I believed that anymore. Eventually, I drove us back to the house. She invited me inside, but I couldn't do it. Not yet. I couldn't step back into that life, not when everything still felt so broken. I need more time, I said as I parked in front of the house. She nodded, tears sliding down her face. Take all the time you need. I watched her walk inside, closing the door softly behind her. I sat there for a while, staring at the empty driveway, wondering if time would really change anything. If we could ever get back to what we once were, or if we were both just trying to hold on to something that was already gone. Days turned into weeks, and still, I kept my distance. I needed time, but no amount of time seemed enough. Each passing day, the weight of the decision sat heavier on my shoulders. Jessica's messages came less frequently, and soon, I realized that even she had started pulling back, giving me the space I asked for. I kept wondering, was there a way to rebuild what we had? Could I ever look at her the same way again, without seeing the lies, without imagining her with him? One evening, after work, I found myself driving, not really sure where I was going. I ended up at Watson's Bay, our spot. It was where we'd shared so many sunsets, so many quiet moments. The memories came flooding back, good and bad, and I felt something deep inside start to shift. I wasn't sure if it was closure or something else, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a kind of calm settle over me. Sitting there, staring at the water, I realized something, and no matter what I did, I couldn't go back. The trust was gone, shattered into a million pieces, and no amount of therapy or apologies would ever make me forget that. And that was okay. I had loved Jessica, and I would always care about her in some way. But what we had wasn't the same anymore, and trying to force it back together would only prolong the pain. The next day, I drove back to the house. This time, I wasn't unsure of what to say. I knew exactly what needed to be done. Jessica was sitting on the porch, her eyes widening as I pulled into the driveway. She stood up, her face a mix of hope and fear, and I could see the question in her eyes before she even spoke. "Tom," she said softly. "I didn't think you were coming." I walked up to her, feeling the familiar ache in my chest, but it wasn't the same as before. This time, I felt ready. Ready to let go. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," I said, my voice steady. "About us. About what happened." She nodded, her eyes searching mine, waiting for the answer she was afraid to hear. "And I've realized," I continued, "that as much as I want to believe we can fix this, I don't think I can ever get past what you did. The trust is broken, Jess, and it's not something we can rebuild. I wish it were different, but it's not." Her face crumpled, and she took a step back, tears already filling her eyes. "Please, Tom," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We can try harder. I'll do anything, please." I shook my head, feeling the sadness settle in. "I don't think that's fair to either of us. You need to move on, and so do I." She covered her face with her hands, sobbing quietly, and for a moment, I wanted to reach out to her, to comfort her like I always had. But I knew that would only make this harder. We needed to end this, for good. "I'll stay with Mike a little longer," I said, "until we can figure out how to split everything up. I'll be fair about it, Jess. I don't want this to be ugly." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I don't care about the house, or the money. I care about you. I care about us." "I know you do," I said gently. "But sometimes, love isn't enough. Sometimes, the damage is too much to undo." We stood there for a long moment, the silence between us saying more than words ever could. This was the end, and we both knew it. There was nothing left to fight for. Finally, I turned to go, my heart heavy but somehow lighter than it had been in weeks. "Take care of yourself, Jess." She didn't say anything as I walked away, but I could feel her eyes on me, full of sadness and regret. As I pulled out of the driveway for the last time, I knew that I had made the right decision. The next few weeks were hard. We finalized the separation, divided up the house, and made it official. Jessica moved out first, and I stayed behind to pack up what little was left of the life we had built together. It was a strange feeling, being in that empty house, knowing it had once been filled with love and laughter, now reduced to memories. But there was peace in that emptiness, too. A sense that, while painful, the decision had been the right one. We couldn't fix what was broken, and dragging it out would have only hurt us more. Eventually, I found a new place, something smaller, simpler. A fresh start. Mike helped me move in, and as we unloaded the last box, he clapped me on the shoulder. "You gonna be alright, man," he said with a smile. "I know," I replied, and for the first time in a long time, I actually believed it. Months passed, and life slowly began to feel normal again. It wasn't easy, there were still days when the memories crept in, and I'd wonder if things could have turned out differently. But those moments became fewer and farther between. I focused on myself, my work, and for the first time in years, I started thinking about my future, about what I wanted, not what I'd lost. One evening, while grabbing coffee at a local shop, I ran into someone I hadn't seen in years, an old friend from college, Lauren. We got to talking, catching up on life and everything that had changed. She had been through her own rough patch, her own heartbreak, and somehow, in that shared pain, we found something comforting. We started seeing each other, casually at first. I didn't want to rush into anything, but with Lauren, things felt easy. Natural. There were no walls, no pretending. She knew my story, and I knew hers. And maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something new. As I looked out over the horizon one afternoon, sitting at Watson's Bay with Lauren by my side, I realized that sometimes, life doesn't go the way you planned. There are heartbreaks, betrayals, and moments where you think you'll never recover. But there are also new beginnings, second chances, and the possibility of finding happiness again, even when you thought it was lost forever.